Lindbergh Tower, Cessna November 60836 at runway 9 ready for departure, departing straight out.
Co-pilot, ___ parking brake engaged ___ to disengage parking brake. Press right bumper plus X. Co-pilot, ___ lift off ___ to take off. Gently press left stick out and down.
Lindbergh Tower, Cessna November 60836 frequency change.
American 59.
SoCal approach Cessna November 60836 is type Cessna Skyhawk, 1 miles southeast of Kilo 9er, Sierra Whiskey Tango, 800 feet. Request flight following.
Cessna November 60836 SoCal approach. Squawk 1106.
Squawk 1106, Cessna 836.
Cessna 836 radar contact 1 mile south of Kilo Victor, Juliet, Quebec Delta, 800 feet. Altimeter 29er, 9er 2.
Roger, Cessna 836.
Generic 50 Juliet traffic is 10 o'clock 2 miles at 1,500 feet generic. Report them in sight.
Generic 50 Juliet, have a generic in sight.
Generic 50 Juliet traffic is 6 o'clock 1 miles at 800 feet generic. Report them in sight. Generic 906 traffic is 11 o'clock 4 miles at 1,400 feet generic. Report them in sight.
Generic 906 traffic in sight.
Generic 9er Oscar Whiskey traffic is 4 o'clock 4 miles at 500 feet generic. Report them in sight. Generic 50 Juliet traffic is 5 o'clock 4 miles at 3,300 feet generic. Report them in sight. Generic 9er Whiskey traffic is 5 o'clock 4 miles at 1,200 feet generic. Report them in sight. Generic 9er 06 traffic is 12 o'clock 4 miles at 700 feet generic. Report them in sight.
Generic Niner Oscar Whiskey traffic in sight. Generic Niner 06 traffic in sight. Generic 50 Juliet traffic in sight.
Generic Niner Oscar Whiskey traffic alert. 12 o'clock, less than 1 mile, 3,600 feet generic. Report them in sight.
500.
Generic Niner 0 Whiskey traffic alert. 6 o'clock, less than 1 mile, 3,800 feet generic. Report them in sight. Generic 50 Juliet traffic alert. 8 o'clock, less than 1 mile, 500 feet generic. Report them in sight. Generic Niner 06 traffic is 12 o'clock 3 miles at 1,100 feet generic. Report them in sight. Generic 50 Juliet traffic is 11 o'clock 3 miles at 1,200 feet generic. Report them in sight. Generic Niner 06 traffic is 7 o'clock 2 miles at 1,100 feet generic. Report them in sight.
Generic 50 Juliet traffic in sight.
Generic 50 Juliet traffic alert. 10 o'clock, less than 1 mile, 2,800 feet generic. Report them in sight.
500.
Generic Niner 06 traffic in sight.
Generic Niner Oscar Whiskey traffic is 4 o'clock 4 miles at 1,000 feet generic. Report them in sight. Generic Niner 06 traffic alert. 9 o'clock, less than 1 mile, 1,000 feet
Dollar
generic.
alt text.
Report them in sight.
Generic 50 Juliet have a generic in sight. Generic Niner Oscar Whiskey have a generic in sight.
Generic Niner 06 traffic alert. 9 o'clock, less than 1 mile, 500 feet generic. Report them in sight. Generic 50 Juliet traffic alert. 8 o'clock, less than 1 mile, 500 feet generic. Report them in sight. Generic Niner 06 traffic alert. 7 o'clock, less than 1 mile, 400 feet generic. Report them in sight.
Generic 50 Juliet have a generic in sight. Generic Niner 06 have the traffic.
Generic 50 Juliet traffic is 7 o'clock 4 miles at 1,700 feet generic. Report them in sight. Generic Niner 06 traffic is 11 o'clock 4 miles at 1,600 feet generic. Report them in sight.